Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Hopefully everybody had a blustery weekend. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo's virtual meeting, featuring guest speaker Christine Brennan, sports journalist, USA Today. And now I'd like to ask Father O to deliver a reflection and have Luke King lead us as we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord our God, a man named Irenaeus once wrote the glory of God as man fully alive. You give us life and physical bodies so that in our bodies we may give you glory. Sports help us to use well our bodies and physical powers and so give you glory. We learn life lessons of working for the common good, humility, and learning from failure. We are delighted to have Christine Brennan with us to speak about sports. But our more serious prayers today must be directed to our elections. We pray that you send your spirit of wisdom on all who are elected to serve. We pray that you send them your spirit of courage, and we pray that you send your spirit of love. May those elected always act wisely for the common good. And please, Lord, give to us and all who vote the willingness to support and pray for all who are elected, regardless whether we voted for them. Finally, preserve us from anger and hostility. Let us have confidence in this great nation, because at the core, it is a nation of good people, and in God we trust. To our prayer we say, Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Father O, and thank you, Luke. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Raymond as our November weekly meeting sponsor. Thank you, Rotarian Brian Kennedy. A couple of quick updates today. Thanks to everybody who attended the Donuts and Cider this past Wednesday morning at the Rotary Shelter House at the Metro Parks Middle Grounds. It was great fellowship in the bitter morning air. We also got to listen to Dave Zink, who told us about a fantastic award the Metro Parks had just received, as well as many of the new opportunities and programs that we'll be seeing in the future. Also, our club leaders will be attending our Rotary Assembly. It's the first one we've had in a long time. It's November 12th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. at the Toledo Club, using proper distancing protocol with a Zoom option available. Also, many of you have noticed in the last Thursday spoke, the first grant cycles were awarded. Thank you to all the committees that were involved. The Rotary Bowling League is in full swing and we need bowlers. Please speak with Tom Romer if you're interested in joining the league. And our final announcement, our holiday party will be at the Toledo Zoo this year. And here to tell us more is our club administrator, Abby Mortimer Sachs. Abby?
Thank you, President Alex. Our event this year is going to be December 12th at the Toledo Zoo. And this event is open to everyone and friends and family. Because of social distancing and that, we currently have a capacity of about 75. So get your RSVPs in early. And like I said, you'll be RSVPing for how many adults and how many children, and if you are a Zoom member or not a Zoom member. So I am going to have something in Monday's email the reminder of no meeting next week. I'll get it on the website, and then it won't be in a spoke till November 12th because we don't have a spoke till then. So we'll get it out before. We'll keep reminding you. I'll say, oh, and I want to thank Rotarian Maria White for chairing the committee, and she sponsored it, inclusivity, and also Rotarian Donna Bogan for sponsoring the event, also Hartman Bogan. So if you guys have any questions, shoot me an email, more to come, but I'm looking, and I think that's it.
Thank you, Abby. Hope to see you all there. It should be a great time. Looking forward to getting out and getting in front of some of the Rotarians. And now, here to introduce today's speaker is past President Tom Backoff. Tom?
Thank you, President Alex. Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. It is my pleasure to introduce Christine Brennan. Most of you know Christine as either a USA Today sports columnist, an author, or as a commentator on CNN, ABC News, PBS, or NPR. Christine is one of the most widely read sports columnists in the country. She has authored 7 books, including Best Seat in the House, her father-daughter memoir about her relationship with the late Toledo Rotarian Jim Brennan. I am fortunate to know Christine from a different perspective, as she participates in our weekly family Zoom calls and is affectionately called Aunt Chris by our 3 children. Indeed, I am lucky enough to be married to Kate Brennan, Chris's sister. Chris, I noticed in the long list of awards and achievements shown in the spoke, you do not list what I know is one of the highlights of your life, serving as the maid of honor at Kate and Tom's wedding. Kate, of course, is on our meeting today. You may have read that Chris is a national trustee at the University of Toledo. Also joining us as a guest today is Dr. Gregory Postel, UT's interim president. Welcome, Greg, to Toledo Rotary. It is not entirely unexpected that Chris would be here today talking to our club, as she has spoken here several times, having returned from an Olympics to reflect on her experience. Chris has covered every Olympics, both summer and winter, since 1984. What is unexpected, like so many things in 2020, is rather than discuss what happened in the arena, in the stadium, or in the pool, she'll be talking about what did not happen and what may be coming up as the pandemic has postponed the Summer Olympics. One of the many events canceled as the pandemic continues to shape our lives. So often, the significant issues within our society interact with sports. Whenever this occurs, Chris has the experience, the insight, and the courage to frame it for us so eloquently. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm Rotary welcome for Christine Brennan.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Tom, for that very kind introduction. And you really have obviously are one of the great sons of Toledo, Tom, even though you were not born in Toledo, but we've certainly adopted you over the last 35, 40 years. And it's just an honor to be here at Rotary, and of course to be introduced by you. Thanks, Tom. I also, before I start, so many friends out there, so many familiar faces. I'm not going to mention everybody because I'll forget someone, but thank you all for being here. And as I said, it's just a delight to be speaking to Toledo Rotary again. I want to just a big shout out. I believe one of my nieces is on this call, and of course that's Tom and Kate's daughter, Jenny Backoff, I believe is out there. Jenny, hi, thanks for coming on the call from Chicago. And then the biggest shout out of all to my wonderful sister, Kate Brennan Backoff, the best of Toledo, the best of us. Kate, I can't see you right now, but I know you're there, and love you, and thank you as always for everything and being the best best middle sister possible and my sidekick for many, many, many years. Also, again, thanks to so many friends and to Toledo Rotary for organizing this and the folks that made this all happen. Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, I've got a few headlines for you to start out. 5 headlines exactly that I'd like to just give you. First headline, the Tokyo Olympics will happen. Definitely they will happen in 2021, if only because the TV networks and the sponsors want to make sure that the Olympics happen. Headline number 2, the Big Ten and all of college football made a big mistake by playing football this year in the middle of a pandemic, but it's a mistake that I understand. Headline number 3, athlete protests will continue, probably toned down or toned up depending on the election results. And we should expect that. And even if some of you might not like them, and I'm sure there are those out there who don't, I'm going to guess that your kids and your grandkids probably like them a little bit more. And as I said, athlete protests and athletes using their voices, especially with social media, are here to stay. That's headline number 3. Headline number 4, TV ratings for sports are down for several reasons during the pandemic, but I think it's likely that they will never return to what they once were. And the last headline for you, sports demographics are changing, and sports like baseball, golf, and even football will feel the effects over the next 20 to 30 years. Now I'll go into those for a few minutes, each one of them, and certainly I hope to leave time for questions because I know that's a fun thing to do, especially if we're talking sports, especially the day before an election where the nation is entirely freaking out. Going back to my first point, the first headline, the Tokyo Olympics. As Tom mentioned, I've covered every Olympics since the 1984 games in LA. That's 18 in a row, winter and summer. I started when I was in kindergarten, and it's hopefully we'll be covering many more to come. It is the delight and joy of my life to cover the Olympic Games. There's nothing quite like the Olympics. It really brings out the best in us and the athletes and the storylines and bringing the world together at a time when we're often so fractured. It is just a delight. And there have been times when I've been sitting in the opening ceremonies at an Olympics, and I've been lucky enough and so fortunate enough to cover all the opening ceremonies as well, all 18. And I can be writing a column criticizing the International Olympic Committee while I have a tear forming in my eye watching the Olympic flag or the Olympic flame come into the stadium. That's the journalist's role. You're a human being, but you're also doing your job, always. Anyway, the Tokyo Olympics, obviously, as I'm sure many of you know, they were postponed in March, and they were scheduled, of course, for July and August of 2020. And that was heartbreaking, is among the many, many heartbreaking situations for so many of us and all of you in your lives and everyone we know that's had sadness, of course, the most of it being, of course, those who are sick or ill or, of course, have lost loved ones due to COVID-19. But quickly it became clear that the Olympians couldn't train. So you've got the world shut down, and then Katie Ledecky is supposed to find a swimming pool to go swim in. And of course, it became clear that that just could not happen. In fact, Katie Ledecky, I'm sure you all know her name, the great Olympian who is going for, of course, another Olympics or 2, won her first gold in London in 2012, and then was the star of the 2016 swimming events in Rio, along with Michael Phelps. Katie Ledecky actually had to swim in someone's backyard pool. And Kate and I laughed about that in particular, the thought of, you look over the backyard fence and there's one of the greatest, potentially the greatest swimmers to ever live, swimming laps in your pool. Now, when Katie was swimming laps in a backyard pool, she'd do 1 or 2 strokes and she'd be at the other side. But as funny as that sounds, we know that a world-class athlete just can't survive that way and cannot train that way. And it became crystal clear. And that's why the International Olympic Committee in late March decided to postpone the Olympics. And I was lucky enough to break that story, which was a highlight certainly of my career. And at that point, then they said they would reschedule them for exactly a year later. So that's what we're looking at, July and August of 2021. There are real concerns if that's going to happen. But my opinion, such as it may be worth, is that they will happen. And as I mentioned at the top here, they're going to happen because at their heart, for most people around the world, the Olympics are a TV show. Obviously, I am honored and lucky enough to go to the Olympic Games. But for most of you, and for me growing up in Ottawa Hills, in Toledo, lifelong Toledo, and of course Old Orchard and then Ottawa Hills, they were, for me, that was a TV show. And I couldn't wait till 8 o'clock hit and I could turn on ABC and watch the Olympic Games. And of course, if you got home and it was 8:15, and those old days, as many of you remember, if you got home at 8:15 and they'd already gone on for 15 minutes, those 15 minutes were gone forever. There were no VCRs, there were no DVRs, there was no taping it to go back and watch it later. There were also no cell phones and no answering machines, and I think Abraham Lincoln was president, it seems like, back then. But that's the way the Olympics have been consumed by so many people via television. And so I think that's what's going to govern this decision to move forward as a TV show. The TV networks, those rights holders, so it's NBC in the United States and others around, each country has its own rights holder. They have to recoup their costs. They have to show, have something to show next summer. And the sponsors, the same thing, the McDonald's and the Coca-Colas and all of the worldwide sponsors and in individual nations having their sponsors. They have to, again, have something. And so what will it look like? And I'll kind of throw out some thoughts. There's nothing definitive yet, but we may see an Olympics trying to be bubbleized as much as possible, knowing the success of the NBA and the WNBA with the bubble. If we have a vaccine and if much of the world has been able to take the vaccine, of course, that's wonderful for so many reasons, and that could change the dynamics. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that we really still have a patchwork in terms of maybe some have been vaccinated, others have not. Certainly possible that some nations would not be allowed to come to Tokyo. And how you would notice that, those great human interest stories where you see a swimmer maybe from an African nation splashing in and touching the wall a good minute after Katie Ledecky or Michael Phelps is finished. Well, those stories might not happen because that athlete might not be able to be at the Olympics. They also may be paring down the field. So instead of having 8 or 10 heats of the men's or the women's 100 meters in track and field, maybe you only have 2 heats and then a final. Again, making a smaller Olympics, making it again, a pared down Olympics. Opening ceremonies might just be, again, a TV production. Maybe you wouldn't have the athletes march in, and that's very sad, of course. Closing ceremony, same thing. Another option would be the Olympic athletes. So again, if you're the basketball team, men's or women's, you'd fly over, you'd compete, and then you'd immediately leave. There'd be no coming in early or leaving late. Basketball would be played over a course of maybe, instead of the full 2 weeks, maybe 10 days or even just a week. Pare down those tournaments, make it smaller, kind of downsize the Olympics as much as possible, and get athletes in and out as fast as possible. So those are a few possibilities, but I do think they want to hold the games. Certainly for Tokyo, the billions of dollars that have been spent, and they were so ready. The irony is they were more ready than probably any Olympic city since maybe Beijing in 2008. And then to have it yanked out from underneath them like this. There's also, I think, a real shot, one more thought on the Olympics for you, that they will not have spectators, or that will be very much like we see now with the NFL or even college football, that you just have a few people scattered in the stadium. But for you at home, if you think about it, as you watch at home, that you probably won't even think of what the crowds, who was cheering it on. And you go back to the Athens Olympics in 2004, which were the first Summer Olympics after 9/11. We did have the Salt Lake Olympics, but that was a landlocked, Winter Olympics where a lot of guys named Sven with snowboards, competed. But when you have the whole world coming to the Summer Olympics, that's the real scary one. And the reason, thankfully, there was no terrorism, of course, in Athens in 2004, coming, what was that, almost 3 years after 9/11. That was great. But the reason I mentioned Athens is because so few fans came. And tour groups canceled because no one wanted to get anywhere near Athens, which basically looked like a home game for the terrorists right there by the Middle East. And it's one of the great miracles in sports and maybe in society that literally nothing happened at those Athens games in 2004. So anyway, bottom line is we have had Olympics before where there have been very few people in the stands and they've happened and gone off without a hitch. So I think that's it. I certainly hope I'm right about Tokyo happening. I think the world and our nation and the world and these athletes, everyone needs the Tokyo Olympics. If that is in fact the first coming together of the world in the midst of this pandemic, as we're maybe seeing a chance to get out of it and having vaccines and having some semblance of normalcy. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have it happen in Tokyo and have those Olympics lead and the athletes lead the way for all of us? So that's my hope and my guess for the Tokyo Olympics. Next, this one might be of great interest. College football. I love college football. There's no one who loves college football more than I. Grew up going to University of Toledo football games and University of Michigan football games, double headers with our dad and sometimes our mom, and then of course Kate, my brother Jim, my sister Amy. And we literally lived for college football in the fall. So when I say these words, it's not because I'm happy to say them, it's because I just believe it's the right thing to say. I do believe it's a big mistake for the Big Ten to have caved and flip-flopped on its, what I thought was an admirable decision to not play football in the middle of a pandemic. Of course, you know, football clearly is the antithesis of social distancing. We all know that. Some sports you can play, we've seen that. Golf is, of course, has been social distancing before there was social distancing. That was golf. But football is the complete opposite. And I know that there are some successes, absolutely. I know high school football is being played some places. I think in Ohio, for sure. Certainly not being played in the DC area. No football, no college or high school football in Virginia, none in Maryland, none in the District of Columbia. That seems like the right decision to push it off for a few more months. But others, of course, have, and I respect those decisions either way. But the case of college football, of course, colleges, well, it was in June that Dr. Anthony Fauci actually said that he thought the only way to have football this year would be to play it in a bubble. And of course, we all knew there's no way to play college, high school, or pro football in a bubble, right? But Dr. Anthony Fauci was once again completely 100% correct. And so what we are now seeing are these efforts to, I believe, and again, with all due respect to those making those decisions, to people bending themselves into pretzels and twisting themselves into knots, trying to put this on, trying to play football, trying to say that it's okay to do something that I firmly believe it's not okay. Now, I certainly understand big Toledo Rockets game against Bowling Green on the 4th. I understand that totally, and if you may disagree with me, but my thoughts are the Big Ten made the right call back in the summer when it took the very principled stand to say, no, we can't do this year. And then what happened was FOMO. And for those of you who know what that is, or for those of you whose kids or grandkids know what it is, FOMO, fear of missing out. What happened was you had parents protesting, especially Nebraska and Iowa, Ohio State parents, understandably, that's okay, of course. And you had everyone looking at Notre Dame playing football. And the Big Ten all of a sudden had a severe case of FOMO. And in my mind, again, the university presidents of the Big Ten, they're the adults in the room. And you're the ones who should look off at everyone who's complaining or whatever and just say, we made a decision, we're standing by it. The Big Ten is not the SEC, or was not the SEC. It's not the Big 12. All those beautiful research institutions, Big Ten in many ways can claim that there is an Ivy League element, especially at my alma mater, Northwestern, and of course some of the others. Well, that argument now is out the window. The Big Ten is the SEC. I'm afraid to say it. The Big Ten is playing football for the money. The Big Ten is riding the backs of 18 to 22-year-olds in the middle of a pandemic to make a buck. And fingers crossed that no one gets sick or hospitalized or God forbid dies. And of course, you've all seen the arguments. We all have, right? Oh, the kids are fine. They're not going to get it. Well, certainly some young men and young women are getting COVID. We don't know what that's going to look like 10 years from now in terms of health and issues, their hearts, their lungs. One source of mine in the Big Ten told me, watch out for those lawsuits 10 years from now. I hate to be doom and gloom. I hope I'm wrong, of course. But it's not just the here and now. And of course, it's also not just the student athletes, it's the janitors, right? And it's the people working in those facilities. And then they go home and then, God forbid, they give COVID to a family member, an older person, and they die. Or all of these kids now we see at Ohio State partying and other places who are partying, Penn State. Of course they're partying The university presidents knew that. The minute you give them football, there are going to be gatherings. And if those gatherings contribute in any way to a spread of COVID in those beautiful college towns of Ann Arbor and Evanston and Bloomington and West Lafayette and East Lansing, if that's the case, Columbus, if that happens, my goodness, shame on the Big Ten. Shame on the Big Ten for doing what I believe is just unconscionable and being terrible citizens, which is, I would have never thought I would say these words. Again, I know they're strong words, I know they're harsh words, and I know many of you might disagree with me, but just some thoughts for you, something to think about. And I do believe what we're seeing in Wisconsin is exactly what I thought and others thought might happen. Where these outbreaks are so bad that they can't play football. And you've got such issues, as I'm sure you're all aware, in Wisconsin with the hospital bed situation. And of course, the elderly, as it's getting colder, as the flu is coming, as winter is approaching. So tough issues all. I understand, of course, why the Big Ten presidents, why the MAC followed suit. The money is so important. I understand that, of course. And by the way, I should say, full disclosure, I am not only a member of a national trustee at the University of Toledo, I am one of the 64 members of the Board of Trustees at Northwestern, my alma mater. I had nothing to do with the decisions of the Big Ten, Northwestern, the MAC, or the University of Toledo, of course, in this area. But I do understand the money problem. And that is, folks, that is a big deal moving forward in colleges. You consider Stanford cutting 11 varsity sports over the summer. Iowa, Minnesota have each cut 4. William and Mary cut a whole bunch. They've brought a few back because of the protests of their alums in those sports. And these are Olympic sports. These are men's and women's, what we call minor sports, or the Olympic sports. These are the ones that are supposedly the non-revenue sports. But I would make the case that losing those minor sports is a very big deal, because you are losing young people. If you cut their sports, they may well transfer. Or they certainly may not feel as strongly about the university as they did when they came to play lacrosse or volleyball or field hockey. And you cut them, and or they leave, they move, they transfer, or they just have a bad feeling about the school. And my goodness, those young people would graduate and would be giving back as members of the community of that university for the next, 50, 60, 70 years, financially and otherwise. And now you're cutting them out of the equation. So it's heartbreaking to see that happen. I understand the economics, which again, if you don't play football, clearly you're missing out on millions and millions of dollars, TV dollars and others. It's a mess. There's no doubt about it. It is a mess. But I certainly hope that we do a better job of trying to keep those Olympic sports on campuses. And I also just want to give just a point about the college journalists who are doing such a wonderful job of covering these issues. When you consider they're on the campuses, and some of the stories that are breaking, by the way, I have a helicopter going overhead. I live 4 miles from the White House, so who knows what's going on, but sorry if you're hearing the noise. Anyway, the college journalists and these wonderful students who are doing such a great job as they want to be members of the press. I believe it is so important. Journalism has never been more important in our country than it is now. I know we hear things about alternative facts. There are no such things as alternative facts. There are facts. And I learned that in beautiful Toledo, Ohio from my mom and dad. And these young journalists are going to be so important in our world. And so I feel very strongly that they're just doing a great job of covering some of these issues of COVID, the dashboard, the numbers. They're breaking some of the stories in the Big Ten and around the country in terms of what's going on with these student athletes and what decisions are being made and how it's impacting their health and their well-being. A few more, and then I'm happy to open it up to questions, of course. Athlete protests was my number 3 headline, right? Athlete protests will continue, and we are definitely going to see them probably for a long time. And I know that for some of you, that might not be good news. I certainly understand the point of view of people who say, why are we having people protest at a football game? Why are people kneeling? Why are people raising their arms? I understand that conversation. But frankly, when Colin Kaepernick started his peaceful protest, which was 4 years ago, by kneeling, which a Green Beret, by the way, told him to do, and that was his suggestion, and it was never a protest of the national anthem. It was about, obviously, police brutality and Black Lives Matter and social injustice. That's what Colin Kaepernick was doing. And if the NFL, instead of ostracizing him over the last couple of years, had brought him in, if one team had signed him, I think it would have changed the entire landscape of this conversation. And I think that is a huge miss by the National Football League. And I'm lucky enough, I've known Roger Goodell since we were both starting out. He is an intern in PR at the NFL, me, the Miami Herald, starting my career. And I've told that to Roger Goodell. I just think that was a huge miss that someone didn't sign him. And I know there might be people out there saying, well, wait a minute, you know, he's not good enough anymore. He didn't show enough interest. I heard that one a lot. I'm sure you did too. Well, there's a guy named Jay Cutler, and he was retired. You cannot show any less interest than being retired. And he was signed and brought back. I think it was Miami, the Dolphins that brought him back. Bottom line is, every excuse in the book, there's no excuse. What a remarkable difference it would have been if the NFL had had Colin Kaepernick as an ally, as opposed to someone from the outside looking in. And what a message it would have sent to young Black men, young Black women, and obviously young white men and women and others who care so much about these issues, as opposed to having this very fraught conversation that we now have. Of course, the George Floyd murder on Memorial Day changed everything. I don't need to go into all of that, but again, those issues were set back when the Kaepernick issue was set, and I think that's why we saw such an explosion of activism, not just from Black athletes, but white athletes as well. The WNBA, amazing. And I think that they're doing what's right for them. And of course, they have every right to do it. And I do think also that if you personally are not a fan of it, when you consider what happened a couple of years ago with Nike, when they decided to do an ad, a TV ad and an online ad with Colin Kaepernick, and then also sell all kinds of Kaepernick gear, merchandise. It sold out within a few days. It was incredibly popular. And who was it popular with? Young people. Young people couldn't wait to get the Kaepernick stuff. Who's the future fan base of the National Football League? Young people. When all of us are long gone, today's 20-year-olds, they're going to be the ones that the NFL is going to be relying on to watch those games and to buy the merchandise. And so I absolutely think the NFL understands that. And even Donald Trump, who of course called Kaepernick and others who were protesting SOBs in a remarkable statement during the Alabama Senate race back a few years ago, 2017, I believe it was. And that led, of course, to many more protests. When the President of the United States dives into something, absolutely, that will, of course, happen. And when you think about that, you had that. But then once the Kaepernick Nike campaign happened, I don't know if any of you maybe didn't notice, the president was quiet, silent, because it was capitalism. And capitalism was winning out. And all of a sudden, Kaepernick stuff was just, flying off the shelves. And so clearly, again, that certainly silenced the president on that one. Number 4, TV ratings. TV ratings are down. I'm sure many of you know that, right? That the TV ratings for all sports have really plummeted. And there are some thoughts. One, if you look at some people talking about it online, they're talking and they say their points are that it is because of the protests. And that people are turning off their TVs because of and not watching because of the protests. Well, that does not explain the 60% drop in the NHL Stanley Cup ratings because there were no protests. It does not explain the drop in the Major League Baseball ratings because, of course, in the World Series, because they weren't protesting. And there's many other examples of that. So what is it? Well, certainly right now we had this incredible, and wasn't it weird to be having, the Kentucky Derby at Labor Day, I think it was, and all of these other things, the jumbled up mess that we had of sports. We just had so many sports going on all at the same time, unprecedented. And, when you have the NBA, NFL, the NHL, and Major League Baseball all playing at the same time, of course, the ratings are going to take a hit because you've got to pick something or the other. And you're not going to have all the eyeballs of the sports nation on one thing in particular, the way it's usually scheduled. So that's a big part of it. But I think there's more. I do think there's more. I think, obviously, during the pandemic, it looks different. And I think people just said, hey, I'm not enjoying it as much without fans, without the noise, without the band, the cheerleaders, the whatever it might be in whatever sport that you might be watching. It's different, and it might not be just as fun to watch. But I also think that we're finding other things to do. And I'm not sure about you, but I know that I have been outside a lot, and I think everyone is hopefully walking and hiking and doing whatever you're doing, running to be, as healthy as possible during this extraordinary time. And I think that some of that may carry over even after the pandemic ends. And that is something that certainly these leagues, owners, officials are going to have to start to deal with, the thought that maybe it will never come back the way it once was. And I think it's also our sensibilities. How do we feel about baseball players with $300 million contracts when our frontline first responders, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the teachers, the grocery store workers, all these wonderful people who have just been saving us, when some of them aren't making anywhere near, obviously, in fact, all of them are not making anywhere near $300 million, which Bryce Harper's making or whatever. And, I'm not saying anything's changing right now, but I just wonder, as today's, young people, the teenagers, the 20-somethings, even into the 30-somethings may well be our next greatest generation, having lived through this pandemic and coming of age. We may have a lot more epidemiologists than we have field hockey players moving forward. And what will happen, in terms of what we believe is important and what deserves to be paid and what professions we feel are more important. And then how does that manifest itself? Of course, the private sector would have a lot to say about that, but the public sector would as well. So anyway, just an interesting time, I think, that may be showing a shift. And does sports, it's an escape for sure, but does it continue to hold us the way it has in the past? And these are questions more than answers, but I kind of throw it out there for you just for conversation and for some thoughts for today. And then a parallel, my fifth point, that sports demographics are changing, and sports like baseball, golf, football, feel the effects over the next 20 to 30 years. I really believe that. Baseball, for example, as a spectator sport, it doesn't have the kids. We went to Detroit Tigers games. We had season tickets at Toledo Mud Hens games. Our dad was the Pied Piper with season tickets. Went to visit our grandparents in Chicago. We went to Chicago White Sox game every year. I couldn't wait, as the oldest of four, just to go with Dad to these games, and our mom sometimes too, of course. But for many of us on this call, right, baseball was our first passion as children. Baseball cards and keeping score of games. 1968. My dad taught me how to keep score. And so the Toledo Mud Hens were on the radio in our house. And obviously you could get every game on the radio. So I would sit there as a 10-year-old girl, and I would be keeping score of every Toledo Mud Hens game off the radio. One day my dad walked through and looked at what I was doing. "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just sitting here. You're sitting there for 3 hours keeping score of a baseball game." I knew shortstop was 6 and right field was 9, and all the numbers and all the little symbols for baseball. And even my dad kind of shrugged. I dare say not only was no girl in America doing that in 1968, not just Toledo or Ohio, but in the country in 1968, I dare say very few boys in America were doing that in 1968. But I was doing that. That's how much I love baseball and how much I loved our Mud Hens. And then, of course, the Rockets, certainly football and men's basketball, Chuck Ely, Steve Mix, et cetera. But so baseball, that was that first passion so many children had. That's not happening now. And how does baseball deal with that over the next, as I said, 20, 30, 40 years? What happens if literally you lose your entire future? Now, gambling, which will probably occur, and pretty soon you'll be able to be gambling at your seat and gambling on if Max Scherzer's going a strike on this pitch, and then you can actually bet on whether Max Scherzer will throw a strike on the next pitch. So gambling may save baseball, it might, but baseball's got a real demographic issue there. Football, it's kind of reversed. I think football fandom will stay. I think, college football and pro football is our national passion, absolutely. But I wonder the participation issues. It's dropped about 10, 12%, depending on what you see, of moms and dads just telling their sons, daughters too, but mostly their sons, of course, they don't want them playing football. So what happens down the road with that as well? That is something the NFL and college football, everyone has to look at about where football is going to be. And for example, a lot of those suburban kids whose moms and dads don't want them to play football, will they go to baseball? Will they go to golf, tennis? What will it be? Lacrosse? But you can certainly have head injuries, concussions in lacrosse as well. Of course, the football, the problem being concussions in a large part over the last, that conversation over the last decade or two. And golf, I think golf is a real problem. I love golf. Our dad made sure he wanted his daughters as well as his son to feel comfortable on a golf course. But so many fathers and moms haven't done that with their daughters. And then you have Augusta National. And I'm going to be on the Masters next week. I'm going to drive down and I will cover the strangest Masters ever, a tradition like no other. And you can say that again, the Masters 2 weeks before Thanksgiving should be fascinating. But the Masters for decades put out a stop sign telling 51% of our population, we don't want you. And some of you might say, well, the Masters, Augusta National is a private golf club. Absolutely. Except for 1 week a year, it becomes the most public face of golf. And what a huge missed opportunity for the Green Jackets, many of whom I like very much. 20 years ago, if they had said, women, we want to have women members. And golf, we need to broaden our base. We need to have more women. We need to have more people of color. Golf didn't do that. The greatest capitalists among us, the people who run Augusta National, people who run golf courses. And I love the game of golf. But as a journalist, I feel it's important to point these things out. The greatest capitalists among us, ladies and gentlemen, chose sexism over capitalism. And now they're scrambling because we know, my niece Jenny, as I said, is on the call. We know that young women her age, young women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who've had Title IX their entire lives, played sports their entire lives, will continue to want to play sports their entire lives. And will have disposable income because they're incredibly successful people, because we raised them that way and we taught them how to win and lose at a young age and teamwork and sportsmanship because of Title IX, because of those playing sports, little kids soccer and t-ball and all the things that happen for girls, just as their brothers had happened for generations. So we've taught now all our young women and girls, millions of them, to love sports and play sports. And then golf put out the stop sign. And golf is not getting those women. They by all rights should be playing golf, but instead they're doing marathons and half marathons and Pilates and soccer leagues and running and you name it. Everything you see women doing, everything your daughters are doing or your granddaughters are doing. Women who have come out of high school and college as athletes wanting to play sports the rest of their lives. Golf never captured, but just a slight percentage of them, folks. And that is just amazing to me, that golf, because they'd be the perfect people to play golf. And now they're scrambling, which is why you've seen Augusta National several years ago start that youth skills program that they have. And they do so much publicity on it, boys and girls, the day before the Masters gets going on the Sunday, before the Monday practice rounds. And that's why, of course, last year you saw for the first time ever a women's tournament on the grounds at Augusta National, the Augusta National Amateur, which was great. I covered it. It would have happened this past year too, but of course the pandemic ended that. So they realize now they're scrambling and they get it, but I believe it's too late. And so to watch what's going to happen with golf, and for me, is writing columns talking about why there were no women members of Augusta. Oh, I was called a lot of things, as you can imagine, as I am all the time on social media, on Twitter, et cetera. And one of those things I was called was a feminazi. And I surprised that it was on a radio show back in 2003 or so. And I surprised them by saying, actually, you know where I got this idea that women should be equal in golf? And the sports host said, where? And he's loaded for bear, right? And I said, well, actually, it came from the biggest Republican I knew. And he said, what? And I said, my dad. For those of you who don't know, my dad, Jim Brennan, our dad, Kate and my father, Jim Brennan, was Republican Party chairman for 3 different times, basically from the mid-'70s all the way into the early 2000s, and died in 2003. Now, I stress that my father was the chair of a Republican Party that he would not recognize today. And that will be my one and only political comment, but I had to say that. And he was all about inclusion and women and kindness And anyway, so Dad, again, he would not play golf in a golf course that his daughters couldn't set foot. So when Inverness did not allow women to be members, a long time ago, obviously they do now, thankfully, love Inverness, love it, love the Solheim Cup coming to Inverness. But my dad would not go play golf with his friends at Inverness. And that's where I learned, isn't it interesting? I learned that. It turned out at our home that the biggest Republican I knew was also the biggest feminist I knew. And all those games we went to and all the sports and Ottawa Hills High School. I was a 6-sport athlete at Ottawa Hills, and I knew one thing for sure. I knew my mom and my sisters would come to my games. Of course, Kate played as well, and our brother Jim and my sister Amy all played at sports at Ottawa Hills, Green Bears. But I knew my mom would be there, but I also knew my dad would be there. And often he was the only dad to come and watch my basketball games in the gym at Ottawa Hills or field hockey or what have you. And so I was shown early on that there was always going to be a place in sports for me. And I learned that in Toledo, in Old Orchard, playing right there, telling time by the clock tower at the University of Toledo at Goddard Field, and running home for dinner and running right back out playing sports with the boys. And then by my dad, who when I was age 8, I asked if I could have a baseball mitt. And I dare say that very few people in the mid 60s, late 60s were bringing their daughters home a baseball mitt. And my dad said, sure, honey. And he bought me that mitt. And then we had baseballs and we had bats and we were playing a whole game, my dad and I, out in the front yard, and all the kids came over to join us. Well, most parents and certainly, dads and moms were telling their daughters who are my age at the time, obviously now, at the time, were telling their daughters that they couldn't play sports. My mom and dad were saying, yes, you can. And look at what it led to. And that all happened in beautiful Toledo, Ohio. There's so much more I could say, but I'd love to leave a few moments for questions. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll certainly be happy to take your questions.
Christine, thank you so much. Incredible presentation. As I have with almost every conversation I think I've ever had with you, I could just listen to you talk for just hours and hours. So if you've got the time, we're all just going to wait here all day and you can just keep going. But we do have a lot of questions have come in. I'm going to take them a little out of order because one of the most recent questions that came in through the chat, I think relates to what you were just talking about. And so I am going to toss it to Kevin Dalton for our very first question. Kevin, you can go ahead.
All right, thanks, Kevin, and thank you for the great, I guess, the opportunity to hear your words. So my question is do you see the pandemic and all the interruption that it has caused in the world of sports as an opportunity to hit the reset button to become more inclusive to not only players and athletes of color, but also females across the spectrum?
Kevin, yes, I do, and thanks for the question. Yes, I mean, I think. I'll speak for myself. This has clearly been the most extraordinary, 7-8 months I can ever remember, right? Not just personally, but also throughout our country and our world. Who saw this coming? I'm sure many of you, I was lucky enough to be with Kate and Tom's family. We all were in Europe in February for a week of celebration of family birthdays and things. And we didn't even see it, right? I mean, you saw the people on the cruise ships, but the thought that this was about to happen, I don't know, clearly we were clueless. But that clearly, there have to be effects, right? There have to be things that change. We certainly have seen with college football that college football is above everything else. So that is not a step in the right direction in terms of inclusion for women. Because colleges now, my alma mater, Northwestern, have made that decision. Football is everything. And again, I think there's real ramifications for that. And I hope I'm wrong. Gosh, I hope I'm wrong. And I certainly hope no one dies because of the Big Ten's decision or the Pac-12's or MAC's or whatever. Anyway, but I do think if we understand how meaningful, sports, being active, right, being outdoors, that's a big thing. Clearly the election and what happens, I think you can't avoid that, clearly. I've heard it's tomorrow, it ends tomorrow. Maybe you've heard that too. And so I think we'll see a lot. I will say this, I own our family home in Ottawa Hills, same where we grew up. And so, the only person probably who works at the Olympics and vacations and hangs out in Toledo and loves doing it. And, but in DC here, they're boarding up everything, you know, all the drugstores, all the windows are boarded up. It looks like, you know, a hurricane's coming. Obviously, that's not what it is. So I think a lot of it, I think this pandemic combined with the political climate and just hearing young people's voices. And so I certainly hope we do. But I do think, and I know anyone who's involved with either high school or college education on this call, and I know we have a couple, certainly I know they care just about women's sports and women's voices as much as men's. And the other thing I would say too is look at Congress. I mean, over 100 women in Congress, probably more in a few days. Like 25, 26 women in the US Senate. That's not 50, but it's sure better than 0, right? I'm a glass half full person. And certainly the potential, which we hardly even talk about now, how kind of normal it seems that we will have a woman vice president. Potential. We will see. And of course, a woman running for president 4 years ago. And I'm guessing that in 2024, there will be women running for president like crazy. And of course, that's that role model, right? You see it, you can be it, which is what Billie Jean King has said. And he wrote to me, and I've worked on a book with her. I know her well. And you know, she says that if you can see it, then you can be it. And I think that's clearly the case. And even for me, I always thought I'd be a political journalist with all the sports that I mentioned, and there's much more I could have told you about. I still thought I'd be a political journalist because I never saw a woman, I've never read a woman's sports byline. Toledo Blade, well, Shirley Levy, but she was covering sailing and you know, so I don't mean to, by no means do I mean to downgrade that, but covering football, covering baseball, you know, that kind of thing. And the Free Press, Chicago papers, and never saw a woman on TV doing sport. There was no ESPN, of course. So to see that, so even I, as crazy and nutty and in love with sports as I was, and journalism, writing in a diary every day, reading the newspaper, reading everything, well, going to Northwestern for journalism, I still thought I'd be a political journalist. So a lot of it is role models, and we are certainly giving our daughters and our nieces role models that we had never, ever done, even a generation or two ago. And that is a huge positive. But I hope everyone's calm. I just hope there's a calmness. And I hope we listen to others. And if someone's protesting with a Black Lives Matter sign and or protesting and or you have a Black Lives Matter sign or t-shirt, I hope there's great respect for those people because we want to hear those voices. This is the United States. We want to hear all voices.
Excellent. Christine, thank you so much. You made a handful of predictions today. The only one I'm going to absolutely hold you to is you said it ends tomorrow. So you said all of the chaos around this election ends tomorrow. So I am going to hold you to that one. All right. So next question is from Kurt Church. Kurt, you can go ahead.
Okay, now that I'm unmuted. Thank you, Christine, for that really thought-provoking intersection between sports and real life and social issues. Thank you so much for that. My question, it kind of revolves around some of the statements you made. One is, of course, football and the money. The second is loss of TV revenue. And the third is, you know, some of the minor sports that are getting cut. Where do we come back from that loss of revenue if those things continue to intersect for people that are on scholarships for these sports? I mean, where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think it's not an easy answer. And certainly all of these people, Greg is on from the University of Toledo, of course, our interim president. And so I can't see you, but I know you're there. And so many people working so hard on these issues. Even people who didn't want to have football come back certainly knew that something had to be done because you're laying people off in athletic departments or furloughing people. And of course, there have been furloughs and layoffs in the journalism world, obviously, and in so many other places. So this is not new. You're all dealing with it in your world or your kids' world, what have you. But we may have a reordering here. Some of these Olympic sports that I certainly am saying we should not lose. I think they are valuable. And, you know, budgets are budgets. And I'm a capitalist. Of course I am. And I think everyone on this call is. And so there will be decisions made that we won't like. You know, there's always a back and forth. And I think we're seeing, you know, if we have an era of opulence and money, it can swing back. What could do it? I mean, these college football salaries are astronomical. Now, again, I'm not one to say if that's the marketplace, that's the marketplace, but it is ridiculous. what is Nick Saban making, $7 million? I lost track. You know, think of what that could pay for Alabama or for other schools. Now people will say, yes, but Nick Saban is bringing in so much more money to the school, and think of everyone who applies to Alabama and goes to Alabama, and future great scientists that go to Alabama because they love the football program. I all agreed with all of that. But there comes a point when we can be out of whack. So I think, over the next 10 years, it's just going to be fascinating. How long does the pandemic last? How long are we in this kind of situation where we're wearing masks? I hope everyone is all the time. Certainly in Washington, D.C., even outside, everyone's wearing masks all the time. And Northern Virginia and Maryland, it's wonderful to see. And the great respect for others that we're showing when we wear a mask. I think that, I think we're in a period of real adjustment here, and sports being such a part of our culture, sports taking us to incredible national conversations. You think about the horrors of Jerry Sandusky at Penn State. We had a better conversation as a nation about that awful, awful situation because it was sports. Sports brings people in who otherwise wouldn't be a part of the conversation. Same with Ray Rice and that punch in the elevator in September 2014 that we saw. And a conversation about domestic violence, that was absolutely enhanced because it was sports. And I'm horrified that it happened, but once it happened, it was better that we could bring so many more people in because sports was that common denominator to bring everyone into the conversation. So I think sports will lead the way in this, but there will be a real reckoning. We can see it in our cities, right? I know people are voting on levies. If you haven't already, you'll be voting tomorrow. And these are all decisions that are going to be made. So I'm one that I hate to not answer a question. I pride myself in trying to answer and being as honest as I can every moment of my life. But I think, Kurt, in this one, I think there's so much yet to come. But we're going to need to fight for what we care about. And you're going to need to fight for the Olympic sports and women's sports. And we want to make sure, like with kids, in the urban kids, right? Because that's where the hits are going to, I think suburban kids are going to be fine. But the urban kids, that's where Title IX, we have not yet hit all the girls. We don't have all those girls all into sports in urban areas the way we do in the suburban areas. Suburbs, we can declare victory with Title IX. You look at our U.S. women's soccer team, the most famous and popular, national team on earth, men's or women's, is the U.S. women's soccer team, obviously, and the most successful too. Well, that we can see what that looks like, and that's our suburbs come to life, but with Title IX. But what about the city kids? And what about these kids who aren't playing sports right now, especially kids without a mom or dad at home maybe, and need that guidance, and we're losing that. So many questions, and I'm sorry, I don't have better answers for you right now, but let's check back in 10 years. I'll try to tell you if it worked out or not.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna try and squeeze in one more question. Diane messaged me that she's got a question, so I'm gonna attempt to unmute her. And Diane, I think you've got to hit the button on your lap. There we go. All right, go ahead.
Got it. That was so awesome. Thank you so much. A question, just as such a front runner, as a woman in this so male dominated field that you went into, what was it like, and who was your mentor when you didn't really have somebody to look up to who was doing what you started doing? I mean, who acted as a mentor for you when you started your career?
Well, thanks, Diane. I was so fortunate to have two parents, Jim and Betty Brennan, who, when I said I wanted to be a sports journalist, I'm sure when I left the room, they were like, what? Because back then, it would have sounded more normal to say I wanted to walk on the moon than to be a sports journalist. We're talking, 60s and 70s. Graduated from Ottawa Hills in 76, Northwestern in 80, and then I got my master's in 81. And so, it wasn't yesterday. And the path that I took was one of just sure love of what I was doing, and then 100% support from the greatest parents on earth. How lucky was I, Kate, all of us, to have the parents we have, and to have confidence. So I do think it does go back to the home, and it does go back to how you're raised. And so I'm also 5'11" and a half. And so I was very tall, even through high school. So, the boys in my classes, were a good half a foot shorter than I was. We all laugh now. I was so tall, basically this height by like 16. And yeah, I was really tall back then. Now we, of course, we're used to 6'2" young women or 6'3", whatever, but 5'11" and a half was tall. So what it did though was give me great confidence. And again, my mom and dad were just always on that. Stand up straight, shoulders back. People are going to notice you. When you walk into a room, they're going to think you're older than you are, my dad would tell me. So who knew that he was preparing me to walk into men's locker rooms and keep eye contact at all times. And thankfully, by the way, that issue, because it sometimes comes up, women reporters have been in the men's locker rooms now since 1985. So that is not an issue. If you hear some radio show bringing it up, it's like asking if women should vote or if someone should own property. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous conversation. And thankfully, and obviously men are also in women's locker rooms. It's just that we don't care about women's sports as much as men's sports. You don't hear about it as much. But women's Final Four, absolutely male reporters are in locker rooms. And I'd be the first woman to stand outside with the men if some man was not allowed in, because I had so many men who stood with me and fought for me back in the early mid 80s when I was in the loading dock waiting and they were going in the locker room. All of a sudden, some would wait with me. And then they would bring players out, the Florida Gators or what have you. So those things work. But anyway, I don't know where now I kind of marvel, Diane, and laugh at like, where does that confidence come from? But I had it. And I had this incredible passion for news, for journalism, for writing, and for sports. And how lucky am I that all these years later, I'm still doing it. I love it more today than the day I started. This pandemic, while it has been horrible, has been the most fascinating 7 or 8 months of my career because it has just been so unusual. Again, I would never root for it. No journalist ever would, ever. We're human beings, and we're heartbroken for so many people. But here it is. It was presented to us. So I did have mentors who were men, and again, I look at my mom and dad always. I certainly had great teachers at Ottawa Hills High School who pushed me and encouraged me. Our coach of all sports, basically back then, because there was no specialization, Sandy Osterman, who's a wonderful friend to this day, and of course a great coach and teacher at Ottawa Hills, was our coach, our girls coach, and our advisor for our girls sports programs, et cetera. And now, of course, everyone has coaches, and every team has got a different coach. But back then, it was so different. And then college professors, and then editors, sports editors. All male. I've had female sports editors since then, but my start was all men. In the Washington Post, my dream job. Ben Bradley was my editor. Walked into the pages of a journalism textbook not long after Watergate. Even though we were a Nixon family to start, Watergate was such an important moment for our country, and journalism was, as it is today, so important. And facts matter, and the truth matters, and journalism is I know you might hear some things about it. Don't pay attention to that. It's better than it's ever been. And I'm so proud to be at CNN. I'm so proud to be at USA Today and ABC News. And NPR and PBS NewsHour are the best in the world. And anyway, but Dick Schaap is one. I had tons and tons of men who were really supportive, Diane, and that was essential. So I never felt alone. I was usually the only woman in a press box. Good news is now you're at the Olympics and there's more women than men covering it. And I started our scholarship internship program at the Association of Women in Sports Media. I think Kate's idea, my sister's idea. And we have now honored over 200 women, many of whom include, you've heard of Rachel Nichols at ESPN, got one of those, and she's a dear friend and someone I've mentored over the years and is now a great pal. And so there's great success. And I always kind of vowed, I never had a role model. So I always tried to think, hey, if I could be the role model I never had. So I certainly talk to all students and men and women, of course. And but we're doing really well, and well over 1,000 women, maybe 2,000 women now in sports journalism. So things have changed dramatically, and it's a really happy story. There should be many more women coming. I think there will be. Part of the problem is the journalism industry is not able to hire right now the way it would normally like to, because every sports editor in the country would love to hire more women and people of color. And it's just hard to do when you're downsizing versus upsizing and laying people off or furloughs, et cetera. So definitely subscribe to your local papers, your national papers, support journalism, because we need it desperately. We need it now. And we also need it when we have the electricity committee meeting and no one's covering it. And then then why, or the water committee and the water board, and then all of a sudden the rates change and no one's covered it. So it really matters to each and every one of us. Journalism does. I'm a wide-ranging answer here, but I guess the bottom line is I felt so fortunate to be doing what I love, and I was shot out of a cannon, Diane. I really felt like I was launched into the stratosphere from Northwestern in journalism. So I just feel incredibly lucky to still be doing what I love all these years later.
Christine, thank you so much. I am going to pass it back to our president, Alex. Incredible presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Christine, and for a very insightful and thought-provoking presentation about how COVID and the current environment is affecting today's sports. I'm sure if you stay on the Zoom meeting afterwards, you'll field plenty of other questions, so feel free to do so.
Sure.
Christine, we'll be sending you a well-known book in Toledo, Historical Tales of Toledo, authored by Rotary past president Clint Mock. You can certainly add this book to your collection of these. We'll also make a donation to the Polio Plus Fund in your name. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Next Monday, November 9th, there is no meeting in recognition of Veterans Day on November 11th. And there are no other committee meetings today. And tomorrow, don't forget to vote if you haven't already done so. And now to send us off with a smile is Chuck's Chuckles. Chuck?
Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, whose most famous work was Pygmalion, died on this date in 1950. Here are some quotes from Shaw. "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. The only time my education was interrupted was when I was in school." And finally, a telegraph was sent from George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, to Winston Churchill. He wrote to Churchill, "Have reserved 2 seats for opening night. Come and bring a friend if you have one." Churchill's reply to Shaw, "Impossible to come to first night. We'll come to second night if you have one." President Alex?
Oh, that's beautiful, Chuck. Thank you much. All right, so we are adjourned, everybody. Make it a great week.
Hi Tom, I'm Bruce from Uganda.
Breakout sessions offer the opportunity to network with members from around the world while learning new skill sets.
As Rotary, we have been static for so long, but this is an opportunity for us to vision again and look ahead.
Breakouts are a place to discover the latest ideas and strategies that drive Rotary. As you can see, convention is an excellent opportunity for development.
The new vision statement is something that I will try and introduce at club assembly in 2 weeks at our club, and we will definitely adopt that.
Another great place to share your ideas is the social media lounge in the House of Friendship. Stop by to participate in interactive quick chats with new friends or get personalized help for your social media channels to help tell your Rotary story.
At the Rotary International Convention in Taipei.